Oh, you're muted.
Hello. I think I'm all good.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, all right. Sorry again for the technical difficulties. All right. So good evening, everyone. And welcome again to the Angular Philippines. So I think this is our third monthly meetup for this year, and it's really great to invite a lot of experts, especially Google developer experts in Angular in our community. And yeah, this evening it's also a very interesting topic for us, especially this is actually the one of the new technologies for Angular. And yeah, in my personal experience, we're also migrating to resource, and this is really a good start. And yeah, we will be joining also for one of yeah, renowned expert in Angular. And yeah, I'm also a huge fan, especially on what he's doing. So I will actually formally introduce our speaker for this evening. So yeah, he is a Google developer, expert in Angular, and also a Microsoft MVP in web technologies. His daily mission is to help development teams adopt Angular and build at scale with the framework. He has taught Angular on all six continents, a world traveler and photographer. He is also an international conference speaker and a published author of several video courses. And I think also for Angular training as well, right? So, Alain. So yeah,
Yeah,
please welcome in our virtual stage, Mr. Alain Chautard. So yeah, welcome Alain to Angular
thank
Philippines.
you. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
Yeah.
So I'll start sharing my screen
Yep. Sure. Go
and
ahead.
get things started. So yeah, today my goal is to talk about Angular resources, which is they've been around for a few major versions in Angular, but the thing is, they are about to become stable with Angular version 22, which makes it a lot more interesting, right? Because we have Angular features that have been experimental for a while, and resources are one of these. But when they become stable, then we're supposed to have a stable API that's not going to change much. And so we can rely on it, we can use it in production, which means it's basically good to go and we have the green light to use it. So I'll cover, everything you need to know about Angular resources, the reason why they have been added to the framework, the reason why this is important, and the impact it can have on your application. Um, so Seiji already did a good introduction of me. I'll just add a few extra words. So my name is Alain, or just Al, because sometimes I know people can't pronounce my name, so I make it easier on you. I'm a Google developer expert in Angular and Google Maps. I've been working with Angular for a very long time. I started 15 years ago, back in 2011. So that makes me feel a little bit old now. But yeah, I'm doing consulting and training at angulartraining.com. That's my daily activity, and I speak at conferences and meetups all around the world, sometimes virtually like today, and most of the time in person. I love to travel everywhere to give these talks, and yeah, that's really me. I've been speaking and teaching Angular for all this time now. So let's get into our topic for today, which is resources. So resources are all about signals. Why is that? Why do we have why resources have been introduced, and why are they all about signals, right? So it's important to remember that Angular is evolving very quickly these days. And so we have change detection that evolved in the sense that now, since version 21, you can do zoneless. And when we do zoneless Angular, the idea is that you don't have the default change detection that we used to have anymore. So this is a diagram showcasing the default change detection from the past, now called Eager since version 21. And the idea with that change detection is that whenever something happened in the browser, you click on a button, an HTTP request completes, there's a timer going off, all of these different scenarios, they would trigger change detection. So that would be Zone.js telling Angular something happened, check your components. And then Angular would just go about and check all components one by one. That was the default change detection, which is now turned off by default if you start a brand new project in Angular 21 plus. The alternative that we had for a very long time, and that has become the default way of doing things now, is what we call on-push change detection. And with on-push change detection, the trigger used to be the same. A browser event, a click, something, it tells Angular, check your components, but then Angular is smarter about what to check. And if let's say if an input changes on an on-push component, then only that branch of the component hierarchy where the component is located would get updated. So it's a little bit better from a performance perspective because now, as you can see, Angular doesn't have to check every single component when there's a change, but is only going to apply changes where they are needed. So that's an improvement. But the thing is, we can do even better. And that's where signals come into play. Because when the Angular team added signals to the framework, they came around with, they're built in with Angular. Unlike RxJS, which was an external library, signals are built in, which means Angular has more insights about what's going on with a signal. And so when we use a signal, what's happening really is that when the value of a signal changes, the components that use that signal automatically get to re-render. And that's because the signal is just going to say to these components, you have to re-render, right? It's going to use the change detector ref and mark, mark for check, like we could do manually if we wanted to trigger change detection. Well, the signal is going to do that for us on all of the components that are dependencies of that signal. Which means if you get into a mode where you use on-push on all of your components, which again is the default if you start a brand new project in Angular 21 plus, then you have perfect change detection. You don't need Zone.js anymore because your signals are just going to automatically tell Angular when to refresh components and which ones exactly. So it's very precise, very performant as a result because you never check the entire component hierarchy. So that's really why these are really super important and they can make a huge difference. Which means in order to make the best use possible of those signals, we need something else than the current APIs, because in the current APIs, we have the HTTP client for HTTP requests. And so that's where HTTP resources are going to come into play. But of course, if you've been following what's going on with Angular, you probably noticed that there's been a lot of things happening lately in the framework, all going in the direction of having what we can call signal-based components, right? Where everything is a signal, really. The inputs, the models, the outputs are not RxJS based anymore, the view queries, all of these things can be used as signals. And so one of the missing pieces before resources was the HTTP client, because of course, every time we make an HTTP request and we use the HTTP client, it returns an observable. And so if we want to move away from observables to a signal-based world, then we need an alternative. And that alternative is going to be resources. Now, of course, we had tools to do that interoperability, such as the two signal function. So, and that still applies today, right? You can turn any observable into a signal by using two signal. And you can do the opposite, right? Turn a signal into an observable by using two observable. But again, that most likely isn't the goal because we want to use signals as much as possible to get the benefits of that great new change detection. Um, so yeah, when we do that transition though from RxJS to signals, something to remember is that a signal is supposed to, it always has a value, right? You can call a signal and say, hey, give me something, and it's supposed to give you something right away. So unlike an observable, because the observable, you subscribe to it, and then later on, you receive a value. So a signal, as a result, might return null or undefined initially, especially if you're doing an asynchronous request. So one of the nice tricks that you can use with the toSignal function is to pass a default value as a parameter. And that default value is going to be the one that you get right away. So you create the signal. If someone reads the value immediately, without, before the underlying observable gets a result, gets its first data, you would get the default value. So that was the RxJS world and some of the tools we had to transition. But now let's get into resources. So resources, they give us a way to incorporate async data into our applications by using signal-based code. And when you use resources, everything is a signal, right? So you basically don't see any observable anymore. You don't need to subscribe or unsubscribe. All of this goes away. Now I have the disclaimer down here. Resource is still experimental. That's still true right now at the time of this recording, but Angular 22 is coming out early June. So it's going to be within the next 10 days. And then it's not going to be experimental anymore. So we're just 10 days away or less from having this as a stable API in the framework. So how does it work? Well, a resource gives us not just one signal, but actually many of them. And that's where it gets really interesting because, so let's say you create a resource out of an observable, right? And there's an Rx resource object for that, our Rx resource function in Angular. That object is going to have a signal to give you the current value, right? So value is a signal that returns the current value. There's an asValue method, which is a Boolean, true or false. Do we have a value or not? There's an error signal that can, give you insights about did we get an error while loading that resource or not. And something we didn't have really with RxJS, unless we played some tricks and found some workaround to make it happen, is the isLoading status. So isLoading gives you true or false, right? Are we currently loading something? Are we making an HTTP request, for instance? Or do we have, or not? Are we done loading? And the last one, status, gives you the specific resource status, which is basically going to be, are we loading? Do we have a value? All of these different things. So HTTP resource is really the main resource that we need, and that's the most interesting to know about because it's a reactive wrapper around the HTTP client, which means if you want to get the benefits of signals everywhere in your Angular application, instead of using HTTP client, now you will use HTTP resource. And in the most basic setup, HTTP resource is used like this. You call it as a function, like all things signal, right? It's always a function that we call. And that function takes a function as a parameter, an arrow function, and that function returns the URL. So this is the URL that the resource is going to reach. Now, why do we have to pass a function here? I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But this is really the nominal case, right? The easiest example I can show you You create an HTTP resource out of an out of an URL, and that's it. That HTTP resource is going to have um, all of these different observables available. And again, no more RxJS, so no interaction with observables, no subscription, no operator, nothing like that. So now that HTTP resource has all of the methods I mentioned earlier. So you can start doing things such as, hey, do we have a value? If we have a value, then we display a component with that value. Else, if we have an error, then we display an error message. Else, if we are still loading, we can display some loader text or information. So all of these is loading, error, has value, and value. There are four signals that we get from that resource API, right? And as you can see, that gives us a lot of flexibility. This is super easy to read, right? There's no async pipe, there's no complexity around using RxJS. It's easy to understand and see what we are doing here, what are the different cases we want to display. And this is all from the base API. So we don't need any external library to do that either, right? It's part of the Angular framework. So let's take a look at a demo, simple HTTP resource. So I'll move to my code here. So the application I want to show you is a movie application showing a list of movies on the screen. And so in that application, we have a movies service, and that service has a resource to display a list of trending movies. So you can see that I create my HTTP resource. I pass my URL as a parameter. And as a second parameter, there's a config object that we can use. In that config object right there, I'm setting my default value. And I'm doing that just so that it's never undefined, right? I know that this is going to get a search response. And as a result, there's always going to be something to display. Even though, so this is making a request to an API. That API has paginated results. So by default, I will have 0 results, 0 pages. My array of results is empty and the page number is 0, right? And that way my user interface can display or not display things based on that data. So that's my resource, right? Just that replaces HTTP client and all possible subscriptions to that HTTP client. So where do we use that trending movies? We use it in the trending movies component. So we inject movie service and then we display that in the HTML, which results in the following. So I'm going to show you what this looks like. This is the trending movies page. So getting the data from my HTTP resource and displaying it on the screen. Pretty straightforward. So that alone is useful because it replaces the HTTP client and we don't need it anymore. But it actually gets even better than this because the main idea of resources is to be reactive. And so we get some extra fun features from the API. One of them, for instance, is if we want to get fresh data from that same resource. So in the scenario of an HTTP request, if we want to make another request to the server to get updated information, there's a reload method. There's a reload method on the resource that we can call, and it's just going to make another request to the server to get fresh data. So nice and easy, right? No need, again, to play around with operators or figure out a way to just reload it. There's a method that just does it for us. And where it gets interesting, even more, I think, even something that's really even more powerful is the fact that, earlier I showed you that we need a function. When we create the HTTP resource, we pass a function as a parameter. And the reason why we need a function is because the URL we return can be using other signals to build the URL. And because we're using others, if you do that, if you use other signals to build the URL, then when these values of these signals change, the request is going to run again automatically. So you don't need, to play around with complex operators like switch map, exhaust map, subjects to figure out a way to say, hey, get me new data because the user clicked on a new filter and that new filter is going to trigger another HTTP request. Now you can just bind that form value to a signal. And when the signal changes, if it's a dependency of the URL in your HTTP resource, then automatically the request runs again and you get new data from the server. So that's very, very powerful. So I'll show you an example of that. I'll show you an example going back to my code. So in my movie service, I have exactly what I talked about here. So I have a search query signal. It's an HTTP resource. It's going to make a request to the search endpoint. And search query is a signal that we read here. And so in order to update the query, my service exposes an update search query method, which is just going to do a set, right, on my search query signal. So setting the new search term in there. And then I'm exposing the result. Movie search result is a read-only signal. This one is public, so it's accessible for my components to display the result. And so if I go to my search movies HTML, or let's say search movies TS first, we see that movies found is just using movie service, movie search result.value. So this is the value signal from my HTTP resource. I'm storing that in a property here. And then in my HTML, I'm just displaying movies found.results and displaying a list of the movies. So this is, I'm using it as an autocomplete here, and I'll show you what this looks like in action. But the idea is we have a text input. When the user types something in the text input, I update the search query to my service. So basically updating the signal, right, and setting the new value to that signal. And then this is going to trigger the HTTP request with that new query, and we get a result instantly. So what does it look like in action? It looks like this. Let's go back here. And yeah, if you have any questions, anything you want to ask, feel free to use the chat and drop your questions in the chat. I'll be answering them as soon as I'm done with my demos and everything. So let's go to movie search. Movie search is a text input. If I type something, so I'm typing text here, and you see that every time I type something, it's just updating the values displayed down here, right? And if we look at the dev tools, we would see that there's network activity going on. Make this a little bit bigger, maybe, so you can see what's going on. I'll keep typing, 1, 2. So yeah, every time I type a character, it's making that request, and we get a response. And so I can select a movie, and it gets displayed on the screen. Now, what's even more interesting is that, so all of that reactive mechanism just happened because I was typing stuff in here, right? So I just type letters, and you can see that for each letter, we got a query for P, PI, PIA. So this one was canceled because if I make a request and the request takes too much time and then there's another request going off, it automatically cancels the previous one and makes the latest request. So technically, you don't even need to do something like debounce, right? Because it kind of does it automatically in a sense by canceling the previous request. Of course, we could still debounce if we wanted to, but I would say it's not even required because of that automatic cancellation that the resource does. And so, yeah, I can select a movie and it gets displayed, and you get the idea. So what's really important here is that all of that reactivity is achieved with just this, right? My input, all it does is set the value of a signal with the new query. So query here is just the characters that I typed in my filter. And that change automatically triggers a new request to the API with that query because that search query signal is a dependency of the search result resource. And so see the amount of code I need to do that, that's it in my service. One resource and one signal to trigger the resource. And again, no complex RxJS knowledge needed here. All I need to know is I update a signal. This is going to be a trigger for my request. Request runs again, and I display the results in my movies, in my search movies HTML, which is the autocomplete dropdown. So the movies found get updated as options in that dropdown, which is what we see right here. So if I go delete everything and say type some text like this, it made a request to the API. We can see it here. And then I can select a movie and it gets displayed. So that's really powerful, right? And we never had that kind of, that kind of API out of the box in the framework before. You could achieve this with RxJS, of course, using operators, using more code, right? And more code that is more difficult to understand and to maintain typically for beginners. But now we just get that out of the box in Angular, in the framework. So that's really, really nice, I believe. So these resources, again, they become available very soon in the framework. They are available right now. You could use them in Angular 20 or 21, but as unstable, meaning experimental, they become stable within the next few days with Angular 22. And yeah, I definitely recommend thinking about it, starting using them because that's very powerful. That's very useful, and it's going to make a lot of a big difference in our Angular applications in terms of performance, in terms of ease of maintaining the code, and all of that. So yeah, definitely a big thing coming up in the framework. And that's pretty much all the content I had for you on resources. Before we get into the Q&A, if we have any questions, again, feel free to drop them in the chat. Just want to briefly mention the Angular certification program. This is something I started back in 2020. And if you need to showcase your knowledge of the framework and get a certificate for that, that's basically what we do. We have this website, certificates.dev, where you can get to take an exam and get certified. And there is a coupon code here, NGBAG26, that you can use to get $25 off any certification at certificates.dev. So yeah, feel free to use it if that's something you find interesting. I listed my blog here. The QR code is to access these slides. And yeah, email address if you want to contact me with questions. So that's everything I had about resources for today. Do we have any questions maybe?
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much,
No
Alain.
problem.
So, yeah, it's a really interesting topic. Yeah, because from your topic as well, you can see that Angular is really changing a lot. Really, really changing, especially for the reactivity and stuff. So it's easier now. Yeah, the previous speaker, Mateusz, so he talked about Angular forms. So it's about the signals. So right now it's now the HTTP resource. So it's totally changing
Yeah,
from where Angular started. Yeah.
yeah, basically we can write code, and the application I showed you doesn't have any, there's no RxJS at all,
Yeah.
and it's all using the modern syntax too, with the inject function and all of that. So someone who, started with Angular, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, and then they just didn't check any updates about the framework. If they see this code today, they're like, "What? It's not the framework I know, right? It looks completely different."
Yeah,
It's simpler too. I think it's simpler, easier to understand, which is really nice.
it's like getting back again, right? Like Angular 1 versus Angular 2. It
Yeah,
feels
yeah.
like that.
Except, when Angular 2 came out, people kind of freaked out a little bit because they had to learn TypeScript, they had to learn all of these decorators,
Only
and
base.
it seemed, and RxJS, that was really the big deal. Oh, what is this thing? We have to subscribe. We learned everything about promises, and now we have to learn about another way to do that. Here it's kind of, yeah, going back to something easier. And by the way, resources existed in AngularJS. They were very different, but the idea was somewhat similar. So yeah, it's a nice, it's nice to get them back in, finally in Angular 22.
Yeah, I'm really happy also because me as a developer, I started with Angular 1. Then
Mhm.
yeah, I also I'm also one of the like the one of the developers who pioneered Angular 2, when it comes to
Yeah. Oh
building.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really, yeah, there's a lot of change. So it's also interesting the one that you showed, that you can also build the URLs with the signals for the query parameters. So
Mhm.
that's really really cool because you don't need to call, for example, you don't need to call the HTTP client again just to have a different query parameters. And yeah, that will make things even simpler, right? So it's
Yeah.
really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and I showed it for the URL, but this would also work if you change the HTTP headers or,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
yeah,
Uh,
anything related to
Anything.
your HTTP
Yeah,
request. If it's a
query source.
signal and it changes, it would trigger the request again. So yeah.
That's yeah, it makes even things simpler. And yeah, you don't have to worry about the debounce and stuff, right? No,
Yeah, yeah.
it's, yeah, everything is handled. So yeah, it's really nice. So, and yeah, we're moving out to zones. So yeah, it's really performant now. We can feel it if you're moving to signals, guys, right? So
Mhm.
you can feel the change, the speed. You don't have to do zones, the change detection and stuff. You don't have to worry. That's also like a barrier for others who is learning Angular, right? Because
Oh yeah.
what the hell even is the change detection and stuff, the view encapsulate. So they don't know. Yeah, it's like a barrier for them to learn Angular. But good thing now it's really changing. So yeah, I'm really happy about the evolution. And yeah, thank you, Aline, for sharing. And guys, if you have questions, yeah, Michael, one of our, I guess, our, yeah, in Tagalog we call it Suki. So he's always watching. So he's Filipino, but he's from UK. So he's also here
Okay.
in Europe. So yeah, he's always watching. So yeah, he's saying welcome. And yeah, if you have questions, guys, you can contact Aline. And I also highly recommend getting the certificates because I also have one previously. So it's not just for the sake of getting certificates, right? It's also measuring on what is your knowledge already in Angular. So I highly recommend. And yeah, Aline has a lot of good blogs and tutorials as well, which is public, right? So you can also read something about Angular if you want to be updated in Angular as well. It's really nice to have the blogs and the tutorials from Alain as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, all of my blogs and videos. So I have a YouTube channel and everything is free, and the blog, same thing. So you can learn a lot of stuff for free on the blog or on YouTube. Yeah.
yeah, true. Yeah, and you're also active on LinkedIn, so I can see that you're.
Oh, that also, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think, yeah. Oh, I just have one question, Alain, because for your example a while ago, on the HTTP resource, I think you didn't have any like error handlings. So yeah, what is like the way to handle the errors on HTTP resource?
Yes, so I did have that kind of thing. Uh, so if user error, blah
Oh,
blah
okay.
blah,
Mm.
which is one way to do it, right? That could be one possibility to deal with errors. Now the other thing is, um, everything that we already have in Angular. still works with the HTTP resource. So if you had a global error handler, for instance, that you use to catch all HTTP request errors, or if you had an HTTP interceptor, right, that would catch errors and display something, that still works. That doesn't have to change.
Mm.
So all of the stuff that used to work with HTTP client, like interceptors or global error handling, still applies, which is really nice because you don't need anything new. But I think this API with the error signal is interesting because you can at least display some local information easily in the component if needed. So yeah, you can use a combination of that plus the global error handling or the global HTTP interceptor if you wanted to. Yeah,
Okay. So you can also use interceptors for the error, so that doesn't have to change as well. So it's the same. Nice. All right.
exactly. Yeah.
That's really cool. So yeah, everything is getting better in Angular. So yeah, I think everything is clear for the viewers. They don't have any questions, but if you have some follow up questions, so yeah, please feel free to message Alain if you
Yeah, feel
um
free to reach out. You can use the blog, you can use LinkedIn, you can use my email, up to you. I always respond no matter what. So,
yeah, yeah, that's true. All right. Yeah, if you don't have any questions, yeah, please feel free to message Elaine. And again, thank you very much, Elaine, for accepting our invite. So it's really good to have you here in Angular Philippines. And I hope we should have a next session again next time. And yeah, we're really happy to have you and share your knowledge with resources. And do you have anything or any more to promote or yeah, other speaking
no, I
engagements?
think we covered everything. Just if anyone needs anything, let's feel free to reach out. Always happy to answer questions. As you said, I'm active on LinkedIn as well. So if you want to connect on LinkedIn, don't be shy. I'm always happy to connect as well. And yeah, thanks for having me today. It's always fun to discuss these topics, especially when it's exciting like this. But yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for joining, and yeah, we'll do another one someday.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Elaine, and have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye bye.